Hello, today we will be discussing the book Jailbreak from the chapter 1 titled Attachment till chapter 2, the exercise Negative Beliefs. Let's take a moment to look at the reading material and raise your hand to start the discussion. So I'll raise my hand. There is something I'd like to discuss on. I thought this chapter on attachment is extremely interesting. And I'm going to read here this part here. The way caregivers respond to and interact with the child wires the way the child learns to interact in relationships. And that's coming from the research by Dr. John Bowlby. Yes, Han?
It's really interesting. I was listening to an interview with Richard Schwartz recently in the IFS podcast, and he was just saying again how this is the core difference between IFS and a lot of traditional therapies, right? There's so much research on attachment theory. It's like one of the most validated psychological theories. And with traditional attachment theory is the idea that unless you've had experiences of secure attachment, you will not be able to feel that resource inside. Whereas IFS is saying it's the opposite of that. You know, it's very radical that IFS proposes that we have it inside, even if we've never experienced any drop of secure attachment. So yeah, what do people think? I guess, of course, it's much harder to uncover, but yeah, to actually believe that, you know, because there are so many other aspects of our neurology that we will not develop if we don't have exposure. Like we will never learn to see if we don't get to see vision in early childhood, right? Like if we're blinded and then we grew up to age 10, our visual system will be all scrambled. There's no suddenly like, oh, we'll be able to see and make sense of the world, you know, but IFS is saying we will have this sense of warmth and self-energy regardless. So yeah, what does everyone think?
You know, okay, Marlene, you go for it.
Yes, yes, I'm thinking about the attunement, which is like a mirroring. So if the infant laughs or smiles, the parent smiles back. Yeah, if they drop something on the floor, the parent might say, oh. So there's a real bond there in terms of mirroring the child's experience. But I'm thinking when there's 3 or 4 children, what happens to the attunement? Because the mom's going to be frantic. She's going. For me, my mom was the only one in the household because dad's out working. It was a nuclear family, patriarchal, and mom was depressed. She had postpartum depression with, I think, her second child, who was born when I was 3 years old. And when I was 4, I was told that I was a very angry 4-year-old. Now, there must have been some lack of attunement for me to be so angry, and then later on to bully my little sister. I was not attuned either to my siblings. There was no attunement. So chaos and arguments and fighting were the norm. So I don't know how families with multiple children can achieve attunement with each child where nobody's emotionally out of sync. I don't even think that's possible. And that's my take on it. Thank you. I'm done.
I have here something to say. So what happens, what she says here in the book, you are not doomed to a life sentence in prison if you don't have attunement or attachment. of this safe attachment, secure attachment. It says here, it is changeable. In the therapy world, this move from an insecure attachment style to a secure attachment style is called earned security. This move can happen when an insecurely attached person teams up with a securely attached person. It can also happen through therapy. Wow, that is so interesting. So it doesn't just happen in therapy, it happens with a partner, perhaps, or a friend, or I don't know what. So who is next? Paul?
Yeah, I love this area. I've been looking into this for years now. So there's a resources, there's a book, look at the size of it, but it's the handbook on attachment, which has got loads of articles on so many areas around this. There's also this one, which is basically about firefighters, which I'm reading at the moment, which is addiction as an attachment disorder, which is very good. It's an excellent book. Philip Flores. It's not on Kindle though, you have to buy the book. And then the one thing I read regarding what Marlene just said before, a book by Donald Winnicott. He's the one of the first ever child psychologists in the world. And he wrote a book called The Piggle, Piggle. And it's the analysis that he did with a 3-year-old or a 2-year, she might have been 2 or 3, 3-year-old until she was 5. Play therapy. He's a genius. I mean, it's some of it for today's day and age is a bit disturbing. He has a lot of the Freudian sexual stuff that he reads into her way that she relates to her parents and stuff. I don't know how true that is. I mean, I think it is. I mean, he's a renowned and world-renowned. He just sees anyway, whatever. But he talks about it's the jealousy of this child because the mother goes into hospital and has a baby, and this child, it's the way she moves into depression. Basically, she moves into depression. And he works with her for 2-3 years through the interactions of play, which is very much what he's about. Play, children, reading, and it's amazing. It's an amazing book. And I've read that. But it's psychodynamic. I mean, all this is psychodynamic, which in terms of IFS, psychodynamic is just deeper IFS work. It's working on the parts at that level of the dynamics of the psyche, which that's what it is, the dynamics of the whole system. But yeah, so, and he worked with her for 5 years. By the age of 5, she was a normal 5-year-old adjusted. I'd also say I read, and don't want to talk for too long, but I read another book about because I read that I looked at kids who were very disturbed, very, very disturbed. And there's a case in this country called Mary Bell who murdered 2 children. And there were 2 children who were involved in that. But one of them came from a family of 13 people. And that mother was very loving. And it showed through, even though there were 13 kids, whereas the other kid, the mother, when she was born, said, "Take that thing away from me," and tried to kill her 4 times by the age she was 5. So the contrasting of these 2 children, one of them was the one who was very disturbed, led the other one. So that's how it was seen. She led the other one into the murder of 2 children. One was 2, one was 3. That's Mary Bell, famous case in this country. She was 11 years. They were both 11 years old when 11 years old when they did this. So this whole area fascinates me of child, the disorganized attachment, how the dysfunction can go to that extent that it can cause. And I've looked into the shooters or the killers, not the Columbine, the other one in America, Sandy Hook. That kid, what his psychology was, he had disorganized. He had problems of attachment. When he was born for the first 3 years, he had his own language, and then he was mute for a time. So that is a disorganization going on there. And then he went on, and he was autistic, it was found out as well. That led him ultimately to do what he did when he was 20. So, you know, the importance of attachment and the ways that that can happen through therapy, through relationships, through, you know, good relationships is vital. I mean, these are extreme examples I'm looking at, but anyway, there we go. Thanks.
Yes. You know, she identifies.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, she identifies the 4 types of attachment, the 4 distinct patterns of attachment. And I'm having the sense that, you know, that stuff should be taught at school, like as early as possible. And I'm still curious when they have this kind of knowledge, and then things like leave the baby to cry, you know, they will learn to self-soothe. I don't understand how those kind of this type of advice comes up or is given when people already know about the attachment and the problems that can create. If you don't have a secure attachment, that can cause so many problems, even murder, as you said, Paul. Yes.
Yeah, I mentioned before in the book groups, there was a video called about Robert, a boy, 17 months old, and it analyzes the fact that his mother goes into hospital to another baby. I found that I saw that first on a Bessel van der Kolk course that I did on trauma. And over 9 days, the kid goes into severe depression. You can see the descent. So at the beginning of the 60s and the 50s, that was the policy in this country. You leave kids alone to cry, or you don't deal with them or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in fact, that showed the trajectory that can happen to a child that's neglected. So, yeah.
Yeah.
It's called Robert, the 17, I don't know what it is. It's on the internet somewhere. I don't know if it is. But anyway, I saw it on the course. Robert, 17-month-old child in a nursery. And it's fascinating video.
Yeah. I think I have seen it. And I wonder when this research was done, what year, like Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth.
They're in the 40s and 50s. I'm big into Bowlby. I've got most of his books. I love attachment theory. And Mary Ainsworth. Mary Ainsworth, I think she was the one who discovered disorganized attachment. He identified secure, avoidant, and ambivalent. And then later she discovered disorganized as another category. So yeah, they were 40s and 50s. I've just bought some books by somebody who follows up, which is Michael Rutter. He develops Bowlby's series. They just arrived this week. Developing Minds. That's interesting. It's minds over a lifetime and how they develop an attachment theory around the whole life cycle. So
And the other?
The other one's called Helping Troubled Children by Professor Michael Rutter. And these, you can't get these on Kindle either. I've tried, so these are only £2 each. And he's a professor, and it's like a goldmine of information. So
brilliant. Yeah. Shall we go through quickly the types of attachment? Yeah. And if we like, I'd like to check a little bit about my understanding or your understanding, guys, of attachment. So I get the secure attachment. It says here is evidence in children who become upset when they are separated from their caregiver, but they are easily soothed upon being reunited. Okay, they are the securely attached children. And insecure attachment shows up in 3 ways. Avoidant attachment. Children avoid caregivers, not preferring them to strangers when seeking emotional support. Because they are not going to be given any comfort from the caregiver, but they might receive punishment. Ambivalent attachment. So children are upset when the parent is unavailable. They, again, okay, they seek the parents out. But here, the ambivalent, when the parents shows up, the child rejects their attempts to provide comfort. And disorganized shows a mix of behaviors, sometimes seeking the parent, sometimes actively avoiding them. So I get the avoidant attachment, you avoid the parent. The ambivalent, you seek them out, but you're not really getting the comfort when they show up, or you don't get what you need. And disorganized is very unpredictable and inconsistent. How, I wonder, do you understand, how do you understand those kind of attachment patterns? Is there an example we can have, maybe? I'm not sure, like a child gets upset and what, yeah, Marie? Marie, yes?
I'm sorry, I couldn't find my mute button.
Yeah.
The disorganized attachment is revealed in children who show a mix of behaviors, sometimes seeking the parent and sometimes actively avoiding them. But like what was said, what Marlene was said about having a lot of children, in my experience, I've had 5 children in 7 years. They're all my children. And some of my children, based upon the consequences, may be imposed to the others for misbehaving, they will avoid me based upon their own outcome of what they think what they saw happen or not happen, like cleaning up around the pool. Now you have to go outside and clean up all around the pool. You had that party, you did this, blah, blah. And they don't want that imposed on them. So I'm finding I may be getting resentful, but this is usually the result of inconsistent or unpredictable caregiving. But I mean,
Yes.
with that many children and siblings, the idea, at least what came to mind after I read that, it forms the blueprint of like, I am not going to do that because the oldest child, like my oldest child's name is Erica. Erica got in so much trouble and blah, blah. And I saw that go along the line with everyone. So when I would ask them, what can we do to make this right? If when it came to their consequence, they didn't even want to speak to me. They would want to speak to someone else based on the idea that they're going to have the same consequence as Erica did. So, the disorganized is hard to wrap around, in my opinion. And from experience. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I'm getting the sense though, I'm not entirely sure if what you said, whether it's disorganized, it might be, or could be avoidant. Because the disorganized means like a parent, sometimes they reward you for something, and another time maybe they will punish you for the same thing, or they ignore something you've done, and then maybe they'll punish you. So you don't know where you stand. That's what I don't know.
From this reading, I think it's the inconsistency, like maybe that narcissistic, like giving you a lot of attention and then all of a sudden being very glowing hot and cold for a reason that doesn't seem to make sense. It's very unpredictable. Just as a comment, that Pessy video that someone from this book club, maybe Ivana recommended, that was on attachment styles, that 4-hour training. They went into a lot of detail of these different ones, which helps me understand them more. And the way they called the disorganized, I forget, they had a slightly different naming. They said that one was much more rare and much more severe, neglect that would cause that. It's not just a little bit of like, oh, sometimes this, sometimes that. It's the people who are disorganized, according to that training or my understanding of that training, it's much more severe emotional chaos that would cause that.
Yes. And I think the ambivalent is a child comes to you for comfort, the parent, and the parent doesn't really, cannot attune to the needs of the child. That's what
Yes, ambivalent is anxious, right? That's the other name of anxious.
yeah.
And that's when the parents maybe are not able to comfort in a success, in a way that the child can receive, and so the child
Yeah.
still
So the child, yeah, I've got something. The child does something wrong, goes to the parent for comfort. The parent tells the child off and shames it.
yeah.
So the ambivalently, the child rejects their attempts to provide, rejects the parents' attempts. The parents will say, yeah, I'm here for you, but also shaming the child, possibly. Why would the child not?
That child could also be avoidant as well, could develop avoidant as well. Maybe it depends on the personality of the child.
Yes, the avoidant does not seek the parent. It can seek anyone else.
Yes.
The ambivalent seeks the parent. Disorganized seeks and avoids.
So in the other trainings I've seen, it's also your relationship to your own vulnerable feelings. So the ambivalent anxious attachment style is also like much more blended with your own difficult feelings. So you're very much more reactive, whereas the avoidant attachment people tend to be like push away their feelings. So they tend to be more disassociate, don't have feelings, they aren't even vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I've heard in attachment theory that there's actually this developmental stage when a child starts becoming avoidant. Something, if I'm remembering correctly, something actually happens in the brain. Something switches off, like their ability to connect to an emotional part of their brain actually gets disconnected. And there is quite like a distinct moment, period where that's happening, and that becomes strong avoidance of their own emotions as well, not just other people.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah. It does change your brain whatever happens in life. Yes, Paul?
Yeah, just looking at the disorganized attachment, the book on that, there's a wonderful description of disorganized attachment, which is fear without solution. When a child is in fear without a solution. She also says, or they also say in this book, the child flips into disorganized attachment at times, but then into other styles as well. Or even maybe the glimpses of secure, but that fear without solution is and also in this book, I'm trying to find a quote. There's a brilliant quote. I remember highlighting it, but I can't find it now. But it's something to do with the fact that this disorganized attachment has as its core this belief that I'm worthless. Because if there hasn't been that attachment with the caregiver, then the child, this is in the first few years of life, the child develops this self-image as being worthless.
Yes.
That is then the patterns of behavior become disorganized around everything, themselves and other people, and they can't trust and they can't connect and they can't, and they live in fear without solution. There is no solution to the fear because there's nobody's providing the security.
Yes. It is challenging when you don't have at least one secure attachment in your life.
And you're a child and you are dependent. Donald Winnicott says this, he says there's no such thing as a baby. A baby is in relationship. It's not that there is a separate baby. The baby is dependent on its relationships. That is the definition of that whole thing. There is no separate child. It can only exist in connection with. And if there isn't a connection with, it's like in the Romanian, when they discovered those, it could be anywhere, but
orphans,
children who are not loved die.
Yeah.
You can provide the means to live physically, but if there isn't anything, there isn't the love, there isn't security, the children will die from lack of love.
Yeah, it starts their growth. Their growth hormones are stunted. Okay. Are you complete, Paul? Yeah. Okay, so I'll just go through here, and it is interesting because the author spells it out. These styles translate into adult attachment, where the issue of security moves from caregiver to romantic partner. So if your attachment is not secure with your caregiver, you probably seek to recreate the same in your relationships. And here's I love this question. She says here, I often ask clients to think about the first person they have the impulse to call when they are anxious or scared. Their answer usually reveals their person. So yeah, and hopefully we all have one secure attachment to turn to when we are like anxious or scared. Yes, Marlene?
I'm thinking when your mother is anxious and scared herself because she has PTSD, let's say from being in World War II, that's a whole generation of people, then the child cannot go to the mother for security because mom is afraid and anxious. I'm done.
Yes, but yes. And something else that has come to my mind. Like, you might go to your mother, but you might not be able to be yourself. You might know, like, oh, my mom can only cope with so much of my fear. I can't, it's up here, I can't tell her the full story.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, don't, yes, speak, it's okay.
I found the quote, yeah. Says in, as one can imagine, because parenting involves giving emotionally to another human being, the more so to a younger child, it becomes almost impossible for those for whom losses and trauma remain unresolved to turn their attention away from their own confusion and pain. They are constantly grappling with the cold core within them, which tells them too regularly, you are worthless, you don't matter to anybody, and nobody cares.
Yeah.
That's the core identity of a child who doesn't have secure attachment.
Yes, but okay. And I have a question here, because it's important to recognize that children can experience different attachment styles with different caregivers based on experience. And I do wonder if, say, a child experiences insecure attachment, and there are 3 types of insecure attachment. Is one type of insecure attachment better than other? Like I would think, for example, the avoidant attachment is probably the most painful, possibly. I don't know. Anne?
Actually, I think research has found the opposite. So there's studies, I've heard that there are studies that avoidant people are not as unhappy. They're not aware of their emotions. And so they're not wanting the relationship, whereas the anxious, which are the ambivalent and also called preoccupied. I think there's 3 names for ambivalent, anxious, and preoccupied. They are in the most in pain because they're very aware of wanting to feel close and in relation. And because they're unable to feel satisfied because of their innate insecurity and worry about being unlovable, no matter how loving someone is, it's very hard for them to believe it and to believe it'll be enough. And the slightest, like, the light goes out of someone's eyes or someone's just having a bit busy, they can feel like, oh, they're going to ditch me. They're going to like not love me anymore. So they are much more in pain because they are wanting the closeness, but they cannot metabolize it. They're not able to metabolize it. Whereas avoidant people, they're not so aware of needing it and wanting it, and they're not so emotional.
Yeah. And what about the disorganized? I mean, it seems they do have a little bit of avoidant and a little bit of ambivalent. So I guess they're halfway.
Yeah, I think, well, so according to the PESI video, I think it's not, yeah, not clear from here. Those are really extreme people. So that's a much more extreme trauma, and they're probably the most, just having a difficult time in life overall. And so according to that video, at least, I didn't realize until I watched those videos how much more extreme the disorganized version is. I used to think it was just a mix, but yeah, so I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure.
And I will ask you a question. If you can find the video, the title,
I'll post it. I'll post it. I have,
I'll
yeah.
post it, and I will mention it in the recording. Yes, yeah, Gretchen?
Yeah, I do think that it's important not to compare the attachment styles in a way that one is worse than another. Just like a parent can have 5 kids and each kid experience maybe a parent a little differently, but it's the same parents, and each child has a different attachment style. And so does one, because they're able to shut down and repress their feelings, have less suffering than the one who feels it in their body that's anxious? Like, I just think it just kind of like this whole thing to me is just a prequel to why do parts develop, how they develop, and how they're protecting us in the ways that they need to based on the way we attached. So I do think that someone could experience the same level of attunement with a parent, but each individual responds differently to that. And so to say one is better than another, it's kind of like saying your trauma is bigger than my trauma. Like, it's just, big T's are worse than little T's, right? Like this comparison, I don't think it's something that we need to, I need to focus on, I should just say, because when you're talking about parts, it's not like one part is worse than another part, right? We want to kind of accept that the system is beneficial in many ways, regardless of whether a firefighter is worse than a manager, right? Like, it's like, I don't know. I just feel like this conversation about comparing is something to, get curious about, because this presentation and this information is about how it affects multiplicity of the mind and how parts develop. So just food for thought.
Yes. Yes. And there is some research that says avoidant attachment might be better, but again, as you said, get curious about parts, and some parts might be avoidant. That's what I realized after reading Twombly's book, okay? That it says here, are you secure? What type of attachment what kind of category? Where are you? And it's not like that. A part of you can be securely attached, another part can be avoidant, and another part can be ambivalent, and another one disorganized. And then that can get really confusing. You need to get curious, even though she doesn't spell it out here.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
I think that's true. It can evolve over time too, right? And
yeah.
And so, I've been on this earth quite a few decades, and my attachment styles have changed based on what's happening in my life, my stress factors, what parts are up, right? What parts are leading the show. And I just have to say, I came from 3 siblings, very close, 3 years, 11 months from my one brother and 3 years from my other. And we all have our own different attachment styles based on who we are individually and how our protective system showed up, right? We all have different, it's just like every person's experience with IFS is different. Every part is different. I do think that this attachment piece is really important, but it also, it's not black and white. It's linear. It's got a flow to it, right? It's
yeah.
And it can change, right, from person to person and within the family as well.
And I'm still not sure, because I can think of 2 people that I have got this avoidant personality, and they seem to be a little bit happier. And me, I tend to be, okay, I do have secure attachment, and also I think the anxious.
I just have to bring up a point about comedians, right? That are really happy, like Robin Williams, right? Just
Yeah,
because someone has parts that appear or
yeah.
or mask in a certain way doesn't mean there's not pain underneath. Just
Oh, yeah.
because someone's dissociative or being able to repress feelings
Yeah.
doesn't mean that they're not still suffering inside, right?
Yeah.
We're looking at
Wow.
a
Yeah.
facade, right? Like we don't. It's simplifying it when we
It is.
talk this
It is.
way
It
of
is.
saying like, oh,
Fine. Now
someone's happy, so they're okay. That's
Yeah.
that's bull.
That's great.
You know,
Yeah.
my
Thank
brother
you
was
so much.
perfect. He had everything in the world. He took his own life.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, that makes sense. Yes, Paul.
Funny enough, I'm just on the back of that. Just, I was going to say something else, but I'm doing a deep dive into it. If anybody's heard of Andy Kaufman, he's a comedian. Well, is he a comedian? He's a genius. He's an artist, and when you see him on stage with some of his personas, he'll at one point he'll say, why are you laughing? You're not meant to be like. He goes into, he does it's difficult to describe. He brings out the reality of human interactions, but he is fun. He was on Taxi back in the day, which I watched as a teenager. That's how I first discovered him. He began on that. He plays this character of, I don't know, some funny little man, but he's a genius. And he actually died well, it's said he died. This is how funny it can be. Oh, I don't know. He died at the age of 35 of cancer. So it's believed because he said, I want to fake my own death. And some people think he's still alive. And that is what was funny, was that maybe people don't know whether he's dead or alive anymore. There's some people think he could be in New Mexico and he's joined a religious monk. He has a very deep, he's a profound guy. He's a bit like, well, he's not like Robin Williams, but he's a genius. I've known him since I was a kid, and I'm just doing there was a film with what's the one? I can't think of his name now. Anyway, he's a goofy
Jim
American.
Carrey.
Yeah, he did the film playing Andy Kaufman. Yeah. So I want to watch that. I've not seen that. But yeah, anyway, Andy Kaufman. He's very Letterman loved him. There's a thing on YouTube with all the performances he did on Letterman. One point he goes around the whole log. He's doing anything about love. He goes around hugging, well, most members of the audience. But and then anyway, whatever. And then he goes into interactions with funny attachment. He goes into interactions with his parents. And this is all comedy, meant to be comedy. It's all very, and his parents are actually there. I didn't want to say that. I just came off the back of Robin Williams. He brings the fact that comedians, there's another side. There's the background of what's going on. Of this whole thing. He's brilliant. Anyway, I'm just going to say what I wanted to say was attachment theory, and it talks about this in this chapter in this book on attachment as addiction as an attachment disorder. Attachment is a generalized theory of love, fundamentally. Attachment theory is about love. It's about love. It's the theory of love, but put into more professionally acceptable, maybe not scientific, scientific to some extent, examining that's what Bowlby did. Bowlby based it, and Donald Winnicott based their theories on observing children's interactions with their primary caregivers. So it's scientific in that sense, but it's about love. So yeah, just to say that.
Yeah, I do like that lens of love when you think about attachment. It makes more sense to me. And people can understand it in a easier, like, instead of saying, oh, what's the attachment style with your child? Okay. How do you show love with your child? It's different. Great, thank you. Guys, if it's okay, I'll read up a little bit here to wrap up. It's a bit of a summary and a bit of an example. And the author talked about a story about Mary, and she says, Mary's story provides a wonderful example of how attachment can change over time. With respect to her father, Mary started with secure attachment. She moved to insecure attachment when her father became unpredictable with his alcohol use. He was no longer safe. She returned to securely attached after he successfully completed treatment, and the family was able to make sense of the whole experience. Well, the father was a veteran and went through, he had the PTSD and soothed with alcohol, and that made it really, he couldn't connect with his daughter. But then he got some treatment, and he could securely connect with his daughter. So in summary, experiences with our primary caretakers, early in life shape the way we learn to show up in the world. Because our brains are still under construction, we must rely on those around us to help us make sense of the world, known as internal working models. These become our template of how we view ourselves, others, and the world around us. So it's interesting that it says if we are tuned and responded to appropriately, we feel secure. The world seems predictable. So, and here there's a little caveat, because she says this security does not give us immunity from unfamiliar, scary, or traumatic events. Bad things inevitably happen. Security helps us move through those experiences in an adaptive way. So, yeah. Yes, Marlene?
I'm thinking of parentified children when the mom is unable to provide secure attachment, and then the children's or one of the children may become bossy over the other children, acting like a parent, and that doesn't work at all. I'm sorry, I forgot my train of thought here. But yeah, I was thinking of the child that, oh yeah, the other thing that I just remembered is my mom always disclosed, like acted like I was a friend rather than a child. And even as a young child, 10 or 11, she would use me as a confidant. And gossip about the neighbors, and maybe they're cheating on their husband or something like really inappropriate, that as a young person really intrigued me and made me very curious about adult relationships. But the way she would tell it to me, it was twisted and negative. And so looking back at my adult intimate relationships, they've been pretty negative too.
Yeah.
So it seems like that can be a destructive, I don't know what kind of attachment that creates, using your child as a confidant. I mean, she should have talked to her husband about that stuff, not me.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's
Yeah,
what
she's using you as her secure attachment.
Oh, okay.
Possibly. And you as a child, because it says your children are egocentric. Yeah. They believe it's all their fault. They don't have that concept of the world. So it's like, I am responsible for my mother. And we will talk about responsibility and beliefs in the second chapter. So it was more about your, like, Marlene, like, I guess possibly, I'm assuming it was your mother's needs, rather than your own needs for, say, secure attachment.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Anne?
That makes me think of all the ways in which like parents can be using children for the parents' needs, you know, for the parent to look good, for the parent to like feel successful or feel whatever. And so in whatever way, you know, or even the parents like, I want my hugs or I want my emotional, you know, kisses from my child, but the parent is not securely attached to the parent's relying on the child. Whereas if to give the parents' needs, where really the parent should be fulfilling more, the parent's fulfilling the child's needs and the child's growth needs. And I think if the child grows up with this burden of thinking, oh, my role is to fulfill my parents' needs, that's this one they cannot, you know, have that secure identity and they don't really know who they are. And it's like what we talked about in the previous book. They become very enmeshed in this is what I'm here for. It's for someone else.
Yeah, it's the child becomes responsible, or it feels like, because it's a good egocentric. It feels like it's parentified.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it back to the fact that with IFS, we're talking about the relationship of the child parts, teenage parts with ourselves. There's the attachment, be it secure, avoidant, ambivalent, disorganized, whatever it is with ourself, you know, that it is, in IFS terms, it's the internal attachment style with ourself, our core self. That's what this is about fundamentally, in this book anyway, I think.
Yes, Anne?
I just wanted to echo and agree with what Paul said. I think that's fundamentally the definition. And then when they do attachment style coding, they're looking at how people talk about their own emotions, you know, very much as they might talk about other relationships, but it's more how emotionally present are they when they talk about their own vulnerable experiences. So it is very much their relationship to their own internal parts.
Gracia?
Yeah, and I think that the comment that Dick makes about that you don't need to get healthy attachment outside because we have it within, that the goal of IFS is to connect with that attachment of self energy within, right, with our parts, right? That's the goal. And one of the things that helped him to believe and trust that that was true, that everybody's born with it and it can change and shift, is when he was working with, you know, sociopaths and pedophiles and, you know, the worst of parts. When he worked with these people, he found that they didn't have any healthy attachment, and like there was nothing that was supportive in these people who turned out to have really fierce protectors, and that they had that self energy that they could attach to within to create healing. And that's kind of like goes back to that thing that he says about like that it doesn't have to come from outside of us, that with IFS it can bring us to that healthy attachment within, with ourself.
And I do have a question here, Gracia, about that. You know, because I still think social connection is important for the well-being. You can't just expect self to, you know, just self to do all this job of taking care of parts, seeking.
Yes, that's true.
Community.
We can't find self energy alone, right? It needs to be guided by someone else that has it, right? And so there's that attunement, there's that connection, right? There's that felt sense of self energy from someone else. And that can even be just being in nature, right? Like having awe of like the magnitude of the universe, right? Having that attunement, right? But yes, a person on their own cannot just suddenly I mean, I'm sure there are miracles that occur, but But yes, there needs to be attunement. There needs to be a connection, but it's not dependent. So the goal is not to be dependent on a practitioner or a therapist. The goal is to teach one how to access their own self-energy so they don't need to be dependent on another, right? Yes, it needs to be shown, it needs to be modeled, it needs to be mirrored, all of that. But ultimately, the goal is to not have someone dependent on anyone but their own higher energy that resides within.
So what about dependence on community? You know, like I, enjoy being in a book club, and I come to you to, like, I go to other people's book clubs, and I like being a member of a community. That is important to me.
Absolutely.
My well-being.
But it's not enough.
It's not enough.
That alone, right? It's like we need both, right? Connection is one of the C words. The C words, one of the words, one of the wonderful characteristics of self-energy, right? And so how do we get connection in community? We bring self-energy there, right? If we're bringing parts that are angry that are, right, like just because you're in community doesn't mean you're gonna have healing. Yes, it's gonna help, but it's about being with others that can give that gift of connection and curiosity, and right, it's that self-energy that can, I mean, getting back to this, right, like if we had parents, teacher, grandparents that had that self-energy that they could give, that's enough to have secure attachment, right?
Yes.
So yes, I'm not saying one is without the other, and neither is IFS.
Yes.
You know, there's a saying about a man on an island. I don't know. There's plenty of sayings about that. We can't, heal alone, right? We need to do it in community. And that's why 12-step groups are so powerful. Fellowship, right? Churches, there's so many areas. Tribalism, community healing has been around since the beginning of time.
It doesn't have to be just for healing, because you could have, like, for hobbies and things. So you can connect with other people going to church or having.
Ultimately, human beings have hobbies and connections it's for a purpose to usually, right? Or it could be a distraction, right? It could be a distraction.
Yes.
But really the ultimate goal is to find this deeper resonance, this attunement, this connection, this belonging.
Yeah.
Getting seen, being heard, feeling like that you matter, like so many things that human beings need. Children may have never gotten, right, in their home environment. And I totally am with you on that. I love groups for that reason. I love community. I thrive in it. It's nurturing to me. Absolutely.
And if you don't work with parts might block that.
Yeah, and I could be in a the Sons of Anarchy, right? Like I remember Paul was talking about. By the way, Paul, I'm watching it. You can be in a community that's not positive and full of self-energy, and you're going to, right, like who we're around is going to affect us, right? The energy that someone is carrying and showing is going. It's like we absorb it, right? Like so. Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I totally agree that it's important and it helps. But it's not something, if you're depending on it, then that's another part, right?
Oh yes.
I know plenty of people that are involved in all kinds of churches, communities, and they're a mess. Like it doesn't make them well. Like, and do people want to go to these things to get well? No, not necessarily. But how beautiful that you can get well in a community. Like how powerful.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's on a scale, I mean, I'm part of a religious community which was founded on Mount Carmel with people living in caves. I'm a Carmelite. That was founded, it's 900 years ago, my community. Well, people claim it was founded by Elijah in the Old Testament when he was in a cave as well. But so, and that's not an extreme position that I'm in. I've always had the spiritual connection going on in my life, which is why I've been able to be so resilient against so many traumas, I believe. If I did not have that fundamental connection to a spiritual, not necessarily with myself, to something deeper, because myself was so broken, and it's been a healing of myself through the deeper connection. But that doesn't mean I spent 9 years in community, literal communities of various sorts. You know, and then I love community. I love being with people, but it's just me. And we have different, I don't think you can compare either, because people are different. It's like all parts are different. People, like we were saying earlier, you know, attachment styles are different. Also, people are different. I get energy largely these days through being with myself in quiet, and be it in contemplative prayer or just in quiet, that gives me energy. I'm renewed. I come out of half an hour and I'm completely different. That is as well, you know, about step work. That was step 11. That's when I joined 15, 20 years ago, the Carmelites. But we meet every month. I meet every week with those as well as a community, and every month. So, but it's the underlying philosophy. So, you know, it's not just about finding energy. And also, of course, I get energy from being with people, coming here, going to my other commute groups. I live with somebody, all my connections. But at the same time, I've got just my own history. For my generation, it is unusual on the whole. I've had a very, very deep spiritual connection. I mean, I'm not saying I'm different. I mean, anybody can access it. I've just always taken the opportunities to access it, given I've had such a massive trauma history. And, you know, I've come from my firefighters when I was a teenager, drugs and drink and, you know, and sex and drugs and rock and roll, all that. I've come from all that and live how I live now, you know, but through all that has been that thread, the golden thread of, and and that poem about community, no man is an island entire of itself. Each man is a part of the continent and woman, a part of the main. If a clod of earth is washed by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as a promontory were, as well as a manner of thy friends, or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I'm involved in mankind, and therefore never send for to know whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. So it's saying another man's death is something where we lose a part of yourself. So that's community. Yes, we're all part of it. But at the same time, there can be the deeper connections that we can have to something greater than ourselves that I can only find by being alone. Sometimes I need to detach and renew and recharge or something.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing the poem.
Yeah. I need to find the poem.
I'm going to post it.
Oh, brilliant. Yes, Marie?
Hi, yes, thank you for the poem. On the bottom of page 58, I related, the security doesn't give me immunity from unfamiliar, scary, or traumatic events. Bad things evidently happen. Security helps me move through these experiences in an adaptive way. I like putting the book in the first person because I have people who can help me make sense of what happened. What happened in my world, and briefly, my parents were immigrants and my father was illiterate in his own country. So when he came here, he was illiterate. I felt illiterate. It was projected into the family without a word. And just the feeling of, even though they were citizens, they felt that they were going to get sent back to their country. And I was born here in America, and for the longest time, I mean, my isms, I separate myself, my ism, my alcoholism, my addiction, they all come from that feeling of trying to save them. And it says alleviating fear. This alleviates the fear of doing life wrong. That's what I wrote, is it makes sense of what happened. For me, after I made sense of what happened, this alleviated the fear of doing life wrong. I felt like I was going to do life wrong and get sent back as well. And it was never told. It was never told. So when I took the test, at the end of the questionnaire, or on attachment style, the extra credit, I saw that I was fluctuating between avoidant and ambivalent, which is anxious. And I'll end with, at 12 years old, my mother would say, there's a pill for that. So we're going to go get a pill. And, you know, your godmother works for the hospital, so no one will know. So that started the pill journey. So a pill will fix it. So the idea of ever even researching to see till now in my 60s that I have a protector. I have a manager. I have these, and this is very eye-opening. Thank you all for being here. And I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marie, for sharing. Thank you so much. Yeah. I also took the test, and I did say before, I think I'm like secure and anxious. I have anxious parts and secure parts. And it is interesting, one of the questions. And she talks about this, then there's an example, and she mentions someone with anxious attachment. And one of the things for the anxious attachments is this one questions. Do you often find yourself yearning for people who are unavailable to you? How interesting is that? If somebody is unavailable, and like if your parents are unavailable, you know, that's what you're used to. And then you might seek that in your romantic relationships. Yes, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, back to this book, which I'm doing this with other people. We started on that years back, but I'm still doing this. The Loving Guide to Reparenting. What is it? The Loving Parent Guidebook. This is just about attaching to oneself, loving parent, because it's all about abandonment. Because like you say, if we've had abandonment issues from our attachments and growing up, we look for that in others because we don't want that intimacy. So we seek out people who are not really available.
Yes.
Our relationships, because we can't cope with the availability until we've healed the inner connection of loving ourselves and being able to cope with the intimacy. Then we can have healthier relationships with others. Then we're ready to receive more and more intimacy.
Yeah.
Because we become more intimate with ourselves, we reparent ourselves. That's the IFS as well. It's all part of the same thing. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I love those questions. Yeah, thank you, Paul. Gracia?
Yeah, I had the PDF for that book. I was wondering if anybody had a PDF for the Loving Parent Guidebook. I'd love it because somehow I deleted it. I just was wondering if anybody here might have it. You
It
might,
was on
Vana,
sale
so
for
go
like
look in your
99
stuff.
cents. It was on sale,
Really?
like, yeah. I don't know if it's on sale. Of course, next time I'll know when it comes out.
I've got it on
Thank you.
Kindle. I don't think I've got the PDF. I'll have a look.
Just curious. Thank you.
Sure.
Guys, let's move through to the next, you know, this, because there are quite a few, chapter 2, Getting Stuck. And yeah, I did find quite a few interesting bits here. Like, you know, this Cheryl, she talks about, she was so ashamed, she said, why do I keep going back to him? You know, she says, I'm so stupid. I actually convinced myself it would be different this time. And of course it's not. So, yeah. He tried to rekindle a relationship, and next thing you know, he disappeared and ghosted her. But that keeps happening, and she always leaves the door open for him. Cheryl's experience is far from unique. A part of her was so desperate for connection, it overrode another part of her that knew it was futile with this man. Yeah. And there is multiplicity of mind. He says it is normal. So a part of her was desperate for connection, another part was cautious, but yeah. All these parts are trying to help us, but they don't always have the same agenda. So let's say the part that wants me to get up early and run, wants me to be healthy, it knows I'm more focused with my clients after I have moved my body. The part that wants me to stay in bed is also trying to help. It knows I work hard and wants me to be able to rest. Okay. And much of the time, these parts function well together to help us find our place in the world. Sometimes, however, the parts stop working together and start fighting for control. Like in Cheryl's story, she keeps letting the bad boyfriend, she's attached to those bad boys. Why do we get caught in such negative cycles? Our patterns are adaptations to our early relational interactions. We can blame our parents or caregivers. And how so the experience with our parents or caregivers form the initial template for how we show up in the world. How does this work? To answer this question, we begin with the role of learning, memory, and pattern matching. These are very important. Learning, memory, and pattern matching. So, for me, when it comes to learning and memory, I found something. Okay, she talks about there's two different types of memory, the implicit and explicit. But you also have the explicit memories are not formed until around ages 3 or 4, the age when our prefrontal cortex is coming online and we have gained command of language. But implicit memories are connected to emotions, sensations, and behaviors, but not to narrative stories. And a particular type of implicit memory is known as procedural memory, and it is totally fascinating. So what is procedural memory? Procedural memories are those that are wired together for specific procedures, as opposed to incidences, and allow us to seamlessly function without the need for our full attention. Like, the software is running without you having to click the buttons. It's like, she explains about driving a car. Initially, you have to think about every little thing. But once it's set in procedural memory, you can drive a car, be on the phone, talk to your friend, eat a sandwich. You can do everything because of you don't even have to think. It's automatic. That's procedural memory. And it's wonderfully efficient unless the program takes over and operates in conditions for which it was
No
not
Man is
meant.
an Island by John Donne, similar to the concept of greater than the sum of our parts.
Yeah, so Gracia, were you saying something? Okay. I'm not sure. Okay. Okay. And this procedural memory comes up in pattern matching. So somebody who's been at war, they come back and then they hear some noise and then they dive for cover. This kind is an example of how procedural memory operates automatically. They learn that it's dangerous, some kind of sound. It's better to be wrong than it is to be dead. The brain was doing its best to pattern match. So for my clients, the procedural memory was set with the sound of mortar fire and its sulfurous smell. It was a traumatic experience with high emotions and the possibility of death. When any of those sensory inputs were experienced later, the pattern triggered an automatic dive for cover. So any of those, it could be the smell, it could be the sound, it could be one of those sensory inputs, not everything. And that triggered that procedural memory. The body reacted before the mind catches up. but the response is not contextually appropriate. So about pattern matching, I don't know if you've done this bit when, you know, it's all jumbled, all the words, I don't know how to explain it, but you can still read it if the first word of the, if the first letter of the word and the last letter of the word belongs to the word. I don't know how to explain it. Paul, I don't know, it does make sense to you? Can you see it? This, yeah, this kind of text, okay? You can read that text, can't you? Yeah?
I can.
Yeah.
I can.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it is jumbled. I don't know how to explain it for people who can't see it. But if the first and the last letter, you know, even if it's, so when something completely new or potentially confusing appears, your brain seizes on one aspect of it to try to pattern match, figure it out based on past experience. So the same kind of idea applies to all our interactions. So even if it's confusing, we try to find, okay, like, you know, when we see clouds and we see faces or something, you know, it's one little thing. I'm like, oh yeah, I can see faces. It's one little aspect, and we try to make sense of it. So the match may come from the smell, the sound, or the way something or someone looks. The brain is so intent on trying to make sense of what it perceives and thus evaluates safety, that it will force a match even if it is not present. It's like voice or facial recognition. Okay. What's that? On detective shows, is it? Yes, Anne?
It makes me think of that face effect, you know, where we're tending to see lots of faces everywhere, even though there are no faces. And then what it's saying here is we could even tend to, especially if we have some relational triggers or concerns, we can tend to see relational rupture or threat everywhere, you know, just like we see faces everywhere.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly. Wow. Yes, because the brain tries to match and protect itself from
Yes.
danger. Yeah. And then everything can appear, you know, all people can appear dangerous.
Yes, yes.
So it says the collateral damage is that no new learning can take place when the body is in that survival mode. Yeah. In survival mode, we go on automatic pilot, which sets us up to use strategies that are not actually helpful. Without conscious awareness, it never occurs to us to question the strategy. As Einstein stated, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. So, yeah. It explains a lot, this pattern matching and procedural memory. And it shows how vulnerable we can be to react not appropriately or in our best interest in some situations. There's a little example here, but again, I'm not seeing the time, so maybe we'll move forward quickly. There's a couple of little bits to cover. If you want to say something, you know, put your hand up and yeah. Okay. Oh, through attunement, we develop positive beliefs about ourselves, others, and the world. I am enough. I am lovable. I matter. I did my best. I have choice. I'm strong. Others are trustworthy. Others help. The world is good. But if it doesn't happen, if we don't have this attunement, the child is left to figure it out on his own. And developmentally, children tend to blame themselves for whatever bad thing that has happened to them. The house must have caught on fire because I'm evil. Dad must have left because I was bad. Yeah. We weave together an explanatory story that we all tell ourselves so many times we start to believe it. It becomes wired into memory via its repetition. It's just a story, but we take it as truth. So we'll move on to inadequacy. And so here in this section, it talks about, Clyde had some time out, and it kind of traumatized him. He thought he was, he said his conclusion is, I'm unlovable because of the timeout. And then let's move on to the other chapter, section, responsibility. Yeah. And she says here, we make ourselves responsible for our incarceration. I did it wrong. It's all my fault. I should have known better. My client Martha came to see me after a failed relationship. She said she can't stop thinking about what she did wrong. Thoughts of what if kept her up at night. Maybe if I would have given more. Oh my God, I don't know, guys, if you have ever had those thoughts of like, what if? And I know from Martha Sweezy, we do have parts that would like to go back and change the past, because parts do not know time. They don't have perception of time. So they have a kind of wishful thinking. What if? Yeah. And another here, she talks about choice and control. Which is like the third theme of negative beliefs. We believe that we're powerless and weak. I can't handle it, we think. I cannot succeed. I will never get what I need. Especially if your parents tell you negative things, they don't praise. So what's the point, we think? Learned helplessness ensues. Here with Brenda, her mother made every decision for her, from what to wear, what classes to take, what activities to join. And Brenda learned that mother knows best, and she stopped trying. And finally, I'm not sure, it's possibly not, but the fourth theme of negative beliefs is safety and vulnerability. Yeah, from a developmental standpoint, the beliefs we hold about ourselves, others, and the world become powerful predictors of our functioning. Okay. I love this little exercise. I don't know if you've tried it. She said, for example, notice the subtle changes in your body as you read each of the following statements. I'm lovable. How does it feel if you say that, if you read that? I am defective. I am powerful. I am powerless. The world is safe. The world is scary. It's really interesting how words can affect our physiology. Our beliefs set the stage for how we show up in the world by literally changing how we feel in our body. The belief informs the meaning we make and thus how our nervous system responds. When asked what the most important question in the world was, Einstein reportedly responded, "Is the universe friendly?" Einstein should have been a psychologist. And that is the end, I think. So the negative beliefs here, there are 4 categories: inadequacy, responsibility, I'm responsible, I did wrong; choice, control, I cannot do it, I don't have control; safety, vulnerability, I can't trust anyone. And that's the end. I don't know if there's anything else that comes up for you guys. Yeah.
Something that I've occurred to me, especially talking around attachment styles and beliefs, and that maybe it's covered in these, but I think, is there a role for a belief that one can discern? Like, I guess for me, I feel like a lot of attachment security comes from a belief that I can discern who is the type of relationships that are good for me, like the people that I can give and receive understanding with. And my ability to discern, I feel like, is a big part of what makes me feel more safe. I don't mean like judging someone's bad or not good, I just mean in terms of to be close for me, like for me to rely on them for different things. And I guess I don't hear about that a lot, right? I mean, of course, the most important thing is having a, solid security with ourselves, because we never know what might happen with other people, and we can all sorts of things. People die, or they change, they move away, whatever. So that's always a possibility. But I feel like discernment and knowing who you can trust for certain needs is something helpful.
Gresha?
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because for me, I never had that ability to discern. And so for my recovery and my healing, gaining more access to my self-energy and being led by that has helped me to be more discerning. And it is something for me in my journey that it's a touch point when I can recognize that I have clarity. Like, so discernment for me is connected to clarity, but it is for my system, it is a very tangible shift in my system when I feel that I have that skill, that I can access that skill. And it's taken a lot of work and a lot of years to be able to access it. Because as I said earlier, I have disorganized. I never knew. There was no predictability. And so I was always hypervigilant, right? And trying to figure shit out. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because it has been a huge part. Discernment for me, I connected to my self-energy growing and being able to tap into it more easily. And it's been a hard journey for me. It's because I have been so manipulated and betrayed and all those wonderful things that happen when you trust someone that is incapable of being trustworthy. So thank you, Nan, for bringing that up. I just had to share that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And she doesn't mention that here, but even discernment, it's a skill, and your parts might not have it. But again, maybe one of your parts might, or one of the, who knows? She talks in this book, she talks to you as a person rather than, maybe some parts would have access to that discernment, possibly. Would they? And maybe there are, I don't know, I'm not entirely sure, but it does depend on the system. But if they're learning, if it is disorganized attachment, it is difficult. It is hard. You have to learn it. So is discernment a skill? Is that what you could consider it on?
I think so. Like, I can discern, and exactly like Gresha said, like, I one time did have someone who was like such a terrible liar. I couldn't believe it. It was like so shocking. And I guess I'm lucky that it was kind of a rare experience. And people would say, like, do you worry that you'll like, encounter someone else and they'll be lying? And I think, yeah, for me, it was really, I think I thought about it and it was like, no, I think I can have a good guess that there's who is and is not like this. We're not 100% sure, but I felt very sure that I could look back and be like, okay, these were the signs that I can for in the future, and that's why I don't really worry about it. So I feel like discernment is extremely important. Yeah.
And, you know, like women who have been abused and they keep going back to those abusive relationships can, you know, maybe a part of them can discern, like, you know, like we're born with some kind of inner knowledge of what is good and bad, but it can get, things get covered up by parts. So I think there's an inner knowledge of, I know what is safe, like I can trust self somewhere. But when there's a lot of trauma, you keep going back to the abusive boyfriend or husband, you know? You can't discern.
Yeah, it's very hard to discern if so much of your experience is with the unhealthy examples, right? Because then you don't know what is acceptable and like,
And
oh,
yet,
maybe it's normal. Yeah.
I do have a sense that something inside might know, yeah? It's just covered up by other things. Yeah, on a logical level or something. Yeah. Gracia?
Yeah, so there is always that inner knowing, right? But to trust it is another piece of it, right? Like trusting intuition, trusting gut, trusting self, right? There's something telling you something's off here, but then there's these parts of like, oh, it must be you, it's your perception, it's not them, right? Like there's parts of us that can keep us from accepting the red flags, right? Like, so, you know, so it is a part, right? Like that gets in the way. And then there's people that are very coercive and manipulative, and then there's gaslighting, and there's, you know, there's lots of strategies to mind fuck someone. Excuse my French.
Yes.
And by the way, I just want to say, I don't think women are exclusive to this topic. I think it's human beings can be abused regardless of what your gender is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, I like this question, you know, if whatever is happening to you happened to a friend, what advice would you give them? It's always easier to advise someone else. You can't, you can see you can discern easily when you advise somebody else. But when it comes to yourself and trusting yourself and decisions, it can be complex. Okay, so guys, I will bring it to a close, unless there's anyone else, any other comments? I'll bring it to a close and see you next time. Thank you all for your participation and your presence here.
Thank you.